Anbennar is probably the most comprehensive mod for EU4 currently out there. When it comes to mod creation, a lot of people come up with insane plans that have a billion features that would take a month for a full-time game development studio to code. Well, Anbennar is that mod, but it actually exists. To be clear, Anbennar is, in my opinion, best described as a universe where magic, the D&D Lord of the Rings style races, exist. And how would the existence of those things impact early modern developments, from religious reformations, the invention of gunpowder, colonization, and even the principles of enlightenment themselves. It also doesn't shy away from the very human urge of observing something magical, like a fireball, or literal lightning in the sky, and doing the very human thing of asking, okay, number one, how do we control this science style? And two, how do we use this to stab people we don't like? Both concepts the mod does not shy away from. Now, before we continue, there is a thing I don't shy away from myself: self-shilling. See, as always, a like would be appreciated, and likes do help the video do better, so thank you very much for the support as always. But it is also time to ask yet again for a subscription, which would certainly be amazing. See, I'm not the only one trying to summon the true Giga Chad within my thumbnails. A certain Victoria 3 YouTuber also does that, and hence we've agreed to settle our disputes like real men, an arbitrary number race on the internet. The winner? First to 25,000 subs. And let me tell you, this is a battle I have to win, for the forfeit for the loss is unbefitting of a true British gentleman. As such, I must implore you, we're working from behind here, please consider subscribing to ensure our inevitable victory. With that said, back to Anbennar, and an issue with the mod is that, well, EU4 is already quite complicated as a game, with a slew of its own interlocking mechanics, which Anbennar doesn't just build up, but frankly expands on quite massively. We're talking about comprehensive magic systems with their own custom-made UIs, entire new types of government and existences such as Iskani adventurers, all the dwarf mechanics about getting 200 development holds, and all the consequences of digging too deep, and I haven't even touched on mission trees. Races are very present on the map, and have significant impact on gameplay, ranging from local countries to entire different approaches to bureaucracy and administration. And of course, different forms of warfare and approaches to combat. This is then combined with the Anbennar tendency to drop the equivalent of an EU4 DLC worth of content into a single mission tree for a country with 3 provinces and under 50 development. And no, that's not hyperbole. Vanail has 3 provinces and a dream, and most of those options in that dream involve war crimes that make the German 1940s regime look like benevolent liberators. This naturally leads to a situation where to truly learn Anbennar, you have to almost learn every single country that has extensive missions. Otherwise you can be in for a big, literal game-ending surprise later. While also having to learn things like how the mod's version of the Holy Roman Empire, the Empire of Anbennar, or AoE, works here, as well as dealing with new emergent mechanics, like adventurer estates, mages estates, and the later conflicts of mages versus artificer, to name just a few things. So what is a country that has the potential for fun late game content, doesn't have too many game-ending disasters, doesn't start too strong so the game isn't one day one, has cool buffs to make up for the fact that you're smaller, while also not being too complicated so you can learn Anbennar mechanics in a relatively neat controlled environment? So, for example, engaging with the Empire if you want to, but ignoring it if you want to as well, or learning to colonize without having it be your entire game plan, making you not forced to exodus in the process. Well, without further ado, let's introduce the country in question, Durain. Like most countries in Anbennar, you have some pretty unique content, starting of course with the more generic things that apply to the region, like some lore about the Lilac Wars that just happened, but, more importantly, you do have a set of custom unique ideas, as well as a extensive but not too concerning mission tree. This is a pretty decent mission tree for its size, especially by vanilla standards, but by Anbennar standards it's not going to be too overwhelming, and has some relatively cool stuff inside of it. Your ideas naturally give you bonuses to sailors and global settler increase, which would be quite helpful for trying to establish your maritime empire, but also contains buffs to cavalry combat ability, as well as some land leader shock pips quite early, which is good, some naval morale to help you within those endeavors, some production efficiency for extra money, and a colonist, which works quite well for your global settler increase. These are about the limit of your global settler buffs. You're not going to be the world's best colonizer, there are certainly other countries that colonize better, but you'll certainly not be bad at it with that loadout. You also pick up some heavy ship combat ability and a decent chunk of it as well to help you with that setting, as well as some Yeti Prestige and an extra merchant with some global tariffs. You also have some morale of armies to finish off your idea set. Not the greatest idea set, and you'll be replacing it with the Laurent idea set later, spoilers when that comes up, but a decent loadout of ideas certainly. Your missions are relatively interesting. You have some colonial missions on the side and some recovery economy missions for your start. And later on you have some rewards for going down your mission tree. More specifically, you'll be able to give some provinces inside your nation some relatively nice buffs, like the new Idea Naval School, giving you some local development cost, local shipbuilding time, and some local ship cost and local ship repair on the province, as well as a modifier called the New Adena Naval School until the end of the game to your nation, giving you some naval force limit, naval maintenance, light ship combat ability, some admiral cost reduction, and some dip tech cost reduction as well, which is neat. You give some more province modifier buffs to some wine provinces, which includes some pretty neat stuff, like again, more local goods produced, local tax, and local production efficiency. That local goods produced to 0.5 and 25% goods produced does seem really strong, and it is, but do remember it's on a wine province. But you also pick up some relatively other nice buffs, like this one here for some governing capacity, as well as some yearly legitimacy and yearly prestige, which never hurts. Another thing to look out for is, of course, the Army of Derain, which, once you pop, and it's going to take a while to get there, makes up for your lack of 5% discipline in your ideas by giving it to you here, as well as giving some leader cost reductions and some yearly armed professionalism, which never hurts, and even some nice land maintenance. It's quite a nice modifier. There's, of course, temporary buffs as well that you can get throughout your mission tree. And I will have to say this buff specifically is actually really, really nice, because those ship costs and those shipbuilding time really do add up if you're trying to do a naval gameplay kind of thing. With that said, though, you are next to the person that you historically just broke free from, Laurent, and they do, in this case, start hostile towards you. This is going to be your enemy number one for the foreseeable future. The good news for you, though, is they do start with a lot of vassals that are certainly quite disloyal, because there's so many of them. They are, however, allied with the Emperor of the Empire. But the good news is, because they have so many disloyal vassals, they're going to really struggle to keep them together, meaning that the first war, while difficult, is actually quite fightable. The one exception to their disloyal vassals is going to be the Redglades. Because they start as a march, they're actually loyal, and they're an elven military, so do not underestimate them. We'll get into what elven military means later, but in essence, their troops are not going to be large in number, apart from the starting number, which will be fine, so they're going to struggle recovering their armies, but their armies are going to be good, and they're going to hit extra hard. With that said, Laurent is certainly your initial enemy number one, and when you're going to be fighting them, I'd actually suggest accepting that these two provinces are going to fall, and trying to focus on defeating them by occupying these provinces here and waiting for them to come around to you, where you can smack them inside your forts. When you do decide to turn around and actually go back against the offensive against them, I would suggest not entering any territory that's, well, their vassals, because their vassals are going to be disloyal and hence not fighting you, unless you enter their territory, in which case they will start fighting you, and this is a good way of preserving your manpower. Another thing to bear in mind is you do have a 5 mil ruler who's quite young at the start of the game, meaning that not only will he make a decent general, I hope he makes a decent general for this demonstration now. Oh, definitely a decent general. You're also going to be quite ahead compared to the 1 mil ruler for Laurent, meaning that you should be able to beat them to mil tech 4 quite easily, and this should be the advantage that you need for your early victory. This means that you have a decent, well, option for expansion into here. And don't forget, a decent chunk of this land is not even owned by Laurent, meaning that a lot of this area can be expanded into. Although be careful, West Ham does own a personal union over some of these provinces, but countries like the Great Ording and Anbennar are ripe for expansion. With that said, though, you are a human nation, and with one of the mechanics in Anbennar, of course, is, well, the racial menus. This used to be a country modifier, and this has now been moved into its own menu over here. How they've modded this is pure magic, but in essence, when you have humans in charge of your country, or when you have humans in charge of your military, you get certain buffs and debuffs. Humans, being the most normal, don't give that many buffs and debuffs. They give you some culture conversion cost, which is pretty neat if you're going down that route, and some more power cost reduction. Not that much, but it's not the greatest thing on the planet as well. You also pick up 5 morale of armies and navies from the human military. This is a thing that all human nations get, but the nice thing is, with humans, you're not getting any debuffs from your administrations. So, for example, these chaps do get some tech cost and production efficiency and infamous gain from their administration, but they also pay for it by losing 5% admin efficiency and losing some missionary strength, as well as decreasing their ability to colonize. So there's trade-offs with a lot of the races available in this game. The big thing with the human zone, which is why I'd recommend starting as them, is that you don't have to suffer through any of these trade-offs. So if you're, for example, trying to play as Nimbus God and trying to go for a very conquest campaign where admin efficiency is important, and you don't realize that they have a debuff for this, you're going to be punished for it. Something that's not going to be happening with the human campaign. They're not going to be excessively good at anything specifically, like tech cost or infamous gain, but they're not going to be punished for being human either. But that's the thing. Managing humans and other races is a decent chunk of how Anbennar works, and you actually have access to a pretty decent chunk of them relatively early on. You have some moon elves here that you will be conquering eventually, as well as some dwarves, so you can learn about their mechanics and how their holds work, because this is a whole entire can of worms that you need to start looking into at some point, because dwarves are cool. But the nice thing is, if you're playing a dwarf, you're kind of forced to interact with the dwarven hold mechanic, because that's kind of what your entire nation is built around. But if you're playing someone like Derain, you can just not conquer the dwarven holds or have them as a subject and let the AI do all of that for you if you don't want to be learning about it. Furthermore, you don't have to conquer the Redglades, you can just keep them as a march or a vassal forever, and in fact it's a pretty valid option to do so. So if you don't want to interact with any races in your first game of Anbennar, you don't have to, you can just ignore them. But there are many options over here, ranging from kobolds to gnomes, or as I like to call them, gnomes. and even some halflings over here, which, again, all of these are optional because you can have a pretty nice campaign just sticking with the area in here. All of these cultures are human. But once you've established yourself in this area and defeated Laurent, time for a bit of lore on Anbennar itself. Laurent and Gawad are big enemies from day one. They are considered massive rivals with each other. And if you're knocking down Laurent down a peg, what's going to happen is Gawad is going to be usually swooping into this area, which means as you conquer this area, your threat of Laurent is going to be replaced by Gawad instead. Which actually I think is quite a good thing, because at that point you'll be stronger, but you'll be fighting a stronger enemy, meaning that you'll have things to do. Basically, you wouldn't have won the game after just winning one war. And I think this demonstrates a nice progression in difficulty that's quite natural in the sense. A weakened Laurent allows for Gawad to swoop in, and then you have to swoop Gawad back out of your rightful land. With that said though, after you've popped your missions and built up your nation, you will have access to the Form Laurent decision, which will allow you to gain access to the Laurent missions for any continuation of the campaign. But before we do get to Laurent, it's important to also mention that as Lorraine, you have nothing in terms of super special estates. So a lot of countries in this game get unique special estates. You don't get any unique special estates, but you do get the adventurers and mages that are relatively default in the same way that the clergy, nobility, and merchant guilds are default for a bunch of other nations. So this is a good way of learning about those estates and interactions. Now you do have the mages, and there is a concept of conflict between the artificers and the mages in this campaign. The gnomes we mentioned earlier, or gnomes again, if you prefer, are very good at artifacy, which means that if you're trying to build around the mages in your game, you're going to be actively punished for it, because your buffs to artifacy are going to be suppressed. With that though, you're able to kind of pick whichever route you want to go. Do you want to go with the mages or the artificers? You don't have any buffs to each one specifically, so you can choose without feeling like you're sacrificing anything in the process. Furthermore, the empire is quite large and it's there, but it's quite far away from you. And until you've established yourself, you're not going to be, well, interacting with the Empire that much. This also means that when the Reformation kicks off, or Reformation 1, you're going to be in a position where if you want to engage with the Reformation and become the Reformed religion, you are in a position to do so. However, you're also far away enough from the Reformation where if you wish to ignore with it and stick with your original religion, you have that option as well. The other thing is, when the first Reformation kicks off in this game, there is going to be a debuff for everyone within the Empire called the Crimson Deluge, which is not the worst debuff on the planet, but can be quite annoying. The thing is with Darain is that you are, of course, far away enough from this empire to not get the Crimson Deluge, but within the area to actually pick up the buffs from the Reformation if you want to go down that route. There will be a third Reformation from the 1600s, and this one is going to hit you pretty hard, as is going to be just most of the subcontinent is going to be hit with it pretty hard. But by the 1600s, you should be in a position to be able to deal with it. I'm just giving you forewarning. Finally, the other thing that I think is quite nice for this nation is that you're kind of not on the warpath for a lot of other big nations. Once you've defeated your early wars, Laurent and Gawad, you're pretty safe in this little corner of the map here. A lot of the big conquerors from Escan, for example, or any, growing powers in Bulwer aren't exactly going to be on your border. They're going to have quite a large buffer state of the Empire to go through. And if you're the one invading the Empire, well, you're the one that's going to be pushing up that buffer state. Meaning that if you do want to just chill, learn the mod, and develop away, or colonize, you can go and hide away in the corner here. You don't have to be allied with the nations over here, but they will exist and maintain at least somewhat of a buffer state for you. Same can be said with Gawad. If you don't want to be pushing into the north here, nothing stops you kicking Gawad out, but leaving them alive, creating an excellent buffer state against the Vikings of the north, or any kind of resurgent Escan power that wants to push into you. Meaning that, in essence, this becomes a relatively safe place to sit in. Your trade is also pretty good at making a lot of, money coming in from the New World, especially when you get the Bay of Wines, as this is basically a Bordeaux English Channel kind of setup with the Bay of Wines. It's not ideal, as there is technically the end node of the Anbennar cost one step up, but you can, for the most part, monopolize the Bay of Wines, as long as you have some way of protecting against this Anbennar cost node. Worst comes to worst, though, you can just push into the Empire a little bit, or as far as you want to go. Really, that's up to you and how much you want to protect your trade. But now let's take a look at the Laurent missions, which again, you're the same religion and the right everything to form once you've killed Laurent. They're not the most extensive either, but they have certainly a decent selection of missions here for things to do, especially if you've already completed the Darain missions. This is going to be quite a lot more missions as a double whammy, including pursuits into Anbennar itself, an industrialization path, and more colonial buffs. Furthermore, and this is going to be quite a bit later, when you do get access to university, you'll be able to build the Royal Mage Academy, which will give you some more Major Loyalty Equilibrium, which never hurts, even if you're going down Artificery, but then more importantly, you get access to the Ruby Crown. This mission is cool. It's going to be quite hard for you to complete. You will need to have one of the Ruby Crown dynasties in charge of your nation, which, by the way, you do not start with, so you will need to switch your dynasty to that. There are multiple ways of doing it, but I'm going to leave it as an excellence to the reader. Just basically roll marry and and die without an heir, so you get that dynasty. Another thing at that point is that you will need to either have literally a 666 in charge of your country, or have your ruler be a powerful mage with enchantment legendary and transmutation renown. This is a mechanic within Anbennar itself. Your rulers can become powerful mages, and when they do so, they can get better at special magic stuff and learn magic. This is a whole other mechanic that I think is really cool and an excellent opportunity to learn, because some nations rely on their rulers to become mages, and you have to learn magic well. Also, learning magic can be quite expensive, but you're in a good position to make money to afford to learn magic. So this is an excellent way of doing it with very minimal risk, because a lot of campaigns that have magic-based rulers that are built around your ruler being a war mage that does magic things, if you mess that up, your entire campaign can end, because basically the only thing keeping your nation alive is your war wizard, which is your ruler. This is not a case that's happening here. This is a very safe way to just basically experiment with learning magic and learn that mechanic. And there's a very neat reward for it, the Ruby Crown Awakened. I'm not going to spoil it, but let me just tell you that this modifier alone is one of the strongest things I've seen on the planet. It is stupidly powerful and basically means that you're not going to have any bad rulers after this, full stop, as well as some other neat side buffs. It's an optional side quest, I would say, but a very rewarding one to go down, and one that I think is an excellent opportunity for anyone playing a campaign in this area to go for. The other nice thing, of course, is that you don't get any unique special disasters. A lot of other nations get a whole bunch of other disasters and collapsing events and things that literally give you minus 50% discipline. Minus 50% discipline, I'm not kidding. There is a disaster in this game that gives you minus 50% discipline, and also puts you into a civil war. Not one of those EU4 civil wars when you have a bunch of rebels. No, a bunch of your provinces secede from you, you lose cause in those provinces, and they declare war on you. And then to win that war, you need to get 100 war score, after which you'll be able to pop a decision/mission to reunite your nations. So literal civil war, as in another country pops out that can build new troops and unsiege. And you have to fight that while you have minus 50 discipline. No, I'm not salty, shut up. But basically, Durain and Laurent are safe from that. You do get the default disasters that there's still a bunch of in Anbennar, but you have to learn about them somehow, and this is a decent way of going about it. So yeah, for a brand new learning campaign of Anbennar, I would recommend Durain. Enough content to keep you satisfied, not too much content to keep you overwhelmed. But that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, but before I let you go, just to clarify, I have enabled channel memberships on the channel, which have some pretty cool perks, including nice little badges next to your name, and a whole bunch of other things like that. Feel free to check those out and support me if you wish. I have some more perks planned in the future, including things like renaming my army templates and automatically renaming my general lists for membership supporters. So if you want to see yourself in any future campaigns or videos, when I get enough supporters to actually have a name list, you can look forward to that. With that self-shooting completely done now, that is all I have time for today. Goodbye.